talk about when the band started maybe going the demise, maybe a little bit, and some.
Do we have to?
I mean, what do you
We
think?
lived it. Piss on these people who want to know what happened.
But you know, the lack of a teaching. You look now, and you look at bands and how they sustain themselves, and you know, if you went back, would you have done it differently? Would you have changed anything?
Well, there was at one time, we had looked at a teaching program and a junior band, and we had one, a liaison with a band out of Niagara Falls. George Davidson had it. And George had agreed that he would go down and work with the band, and we'd throw youngsters in there and kind of mix it up a little bit, and they would start to play, and then as the players developed, we would be able to get them. Well, after we took the first two, George decided to shut the gates, and he wanted his own band and was going to challenge us in 3 years and all these good things.
They did really well.
They won the grade 4, they won the grade 3, won grade 2. All in 3 or 3 years they were up in grade 2. And the band unfortunately fell apart. So our one try at that had less than a successful result.
If you recall, it was Niagara District, and George started out of the Chippewa Legion at the time, and Jake Watson ended up being the pipe major, and Johnny Kirkwood Jr. was a lead drummer.
Yeah.
And so this band was destined to.
They did make it to grade 1 though, didn't they?
They did.
For a year.
1 year.
Yeah,
One year. And so the whole idea of getting a feeder band blew up in our face. Really, it did, eh?
But as a result of that, what happened was, in my opinion, we lost a number of players from the U.S. that bypassed us, that went through to Toronto because of this aversion to the Clan at that time. That had developed as a result of the feeder band to some degree.
Absolutely. The 78 Frasers became that benefited from it. Ian Donaldson was
the whole
in that
drum
band.
section.
In the drum section, Tim Murphy and
Tom Foote.
Tom Foote. And that was an important turning point in the history of the band, because we got an aging pipe section now, and the experiment to get a feeder group going when feeder groups weren't the order of the day back then. You got to realize that no other band had a feeder band. It just wasn't heard of, and so we lost that potential, and we've still got this aging pipe section. So now we're into the 80s. The 78th has started, and then the competition really starts to get.
What about the advent of the 78 Frasers come on the scene, and you know, maybe a different kind of approach, more musical, creative?
I think you hit it there, was the music.
Yeah, we kind of stagnated a bit,
that was a big
but we were comfortable playing what we were playing. And as Ken said, well, it's worked, let's try this one more time.
But at the same time, you had Scott McCauley in the ranks, who's incredibly creative.
Part of the probably the biggest miss the band has was when Scott moved to Guatemala in 83, 4, maybe 5.
That's correct, yeah.
And I think when Scott left, the ability for creativity sort of went with Scott, and so did a potential future leader with a hell of a lot of charisma.
He was a music man.
I think we stagnated through the rest of the 80s, trying to keep doing stuff the old way and go out and win a contest on our sound.
Yeah.
But the Frasers learned to get a sound,
Well,
so we
they
lost our
finally got a
advantage.
sound,
You know?
after a number of years. But I think that
didn't even
lack of creativity really hurt the band. And I was probably as guilty as anyone for getting stuck that this is the way, this is what works.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to touch this sound, therefore we're going to win. And at the same time, we had some pretty dismal years of drumming, to the point where it caused me to walk away from the band for 2 years until Lindsay and Douglas and Graham came back in 78.
In the 80s, we're starting to see the disintegration of the regionality of bands. There's more mobility. There's people that are traveling from Ontario out west to go to school and vice versa, and no longer was it the appropriate thing or the done thing to just play in your backyard because it was convenient. Now we'll drive 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours.
Somebody from the States went Well, if I'm going to go travel and play with a band in Ontario, I want to go play with a band in Toronto.
Yeah.
I'm going up there anyway, so
Yeah, and
because of and maybe that had to do with part of the music.
and there was also
Yeah.
the yearly trip to the Worlds.
Well, that
we
well, that
jumped
happens
on
on.
that
Yeah.
2 years too late.
It's interesting, it might have started even before then. I can recall Andrew writing me a letter from St. Louis. I can't recall what year it was, mid-'80s, wasn't it?
I don't know.
You to come up and play in the band.
Dear Santa.
Yeah, dear Santa. And I recall my response, and we didn't know whether we could field a band that year or
Yeah.
not. And I said for Andrew to make the trip up for the summer here to Ontario. I couldn't guarantee there'd be a band even to play with, and that was my
Yeah.
response back to you, you know. So.
So a different kind of atmosphere was creeping in Ontario. You made a pipe major change too. Joe Rannox
Yes,
but you stayed with the band.
for a short period of time
Yeah.
only.
And then things sort of gradually petered out a bit.
It's
Well, Pete and I both played through that period.
Yeah.
And that's
it's hard to say how that went. Joe's strength was in the closer circle of things, but getting out, and at that time, the competition in the wintertime, with what I used to call it the off-season contest, was between him and Livingston and whoever else was a pipe major to find and recruit, because by then, recruitment was the way you did it. You were on the phone at Labor Day, and you call up every single body in the Grade 1 band and said, "Do you want to come down and play?" Strangely, we never got calls. But although I know even today, just as an example, I'm walking across the park at Georgetown last year with a good friend of mine from Newmarket who played with us for a couple of years. And that first contest he played with us, guys are coming over, "Listen, when you're done with this band, you want to play with us next year." I mean, that's it's that blatant. There's no kind of quiet conversations off the side after Fergus as it was before. Now it's just blatant out there. We want everybody we can get our hands on. There was evidence when you saw, actually I think even in the years you played in the Frasers, there would be 7 or 8 bodies that never got on the park, but paid the money, got the kilt, and went for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
Never helped even themselves to do that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, well, we saw that happening, and no matter who we called, we didn't have the ticket that they were looking for.
We were scrimmaging for players at the end.
Yeah.
And then ultimately the merger with
With
PA,
Metro.
with Toronto Police, yeah. And that was.
That was Lindsay and Shane.
That was after 92.
Yeah.
92.
Lindsay and
That was
Jake
the
were
end.
very good friends. Lindsay Kirkwood, Jake Watson.
And was that the right thing to do? Would the band have continued in
Well, the
some
band was
shape?
split then.
We
The
were
band,
out of
the band was
people.
split.
Yeah.
There's only
We
you,
only
I,
had-
and Graham at the table
Yeah.
that are here today from that particular time.
I think half went to Metro and half went to Niagara.
We had
At
4
that time.
pipers. There was 4 pipers that ended up playing. I don't think you played the first year, Pete, but
I
you
played
played
the
the year
first
after.
year. I didn't play after that.
It was
didn't
4.
You never went?
There was
Ron
4
Bowen
pipers,
didn't
1
go.
drummer.
Jerry
and a
Hall
bass
didn't go.
drummer.
Joe went and Davey Goodall. They
Yeah,
played
and that was it.
I think the important thing that came out of that meeting, besides the demise of the band, was that we agreed that the band would never come back as anything but a Grade 1 band. And, because there was, there was hints at that meeting about, I want the Kilts to do this, and I want to start this up, and we'll come back as a Grade 3 band,
Yeah, that
But-
conversation with that
but-
individual didn't go anywhere.
But
So we put that in the meeting minutes from that if the band ever wanted to resurrect again, that it would have to be at the Grade 1 level.
Mhm.
the other thing that was said at that meeting, and I don't know if some of you know this or not, but the agreement was that we would have had a band to field in the Clan that year anyways. We only had 2 drummers left and maybe 6, 7 pipers. But the agreement was that if people went to them, if there were certain things that, I don't want to put them in a spot, because if certain things got reduced or were no longer there, that the agreement was that band would become the Clan MacFarlane. And certain things got reduced, but it didn't become the Clan MacFarlane.
The agreement
And
was,
and you guys were there for that. And
we made the agreement.
yes,
The agreement
yeah.
was with Jake and Lindsay and John McDonald Sr. that, yes, we could take 6 or 5 or 6 pipers up and a couple of drummers. And we would leave what we had in a shoebox.
Yeah.
And if things after the first year or two didn't turn out and keep moving forward and progressing, because there was talk at that time of Metro losing everything as far as being able to support a band.
Mm-hmm. That was it.
The whole shooting match, for those that wanted to, would come down to St. Catharines, we had some money in the bank, we had full uniforms, and start again. Well, things deteriorated rather quickly after 2 years in Toronto, and it never happened.
No.
It was a
It got,
fool's
it
errand
got
to
shoved
vote.
aside.
Yeah.
And how, when Clan MacFarlane stopped, you were with the 78 at the time.
No, I, in 1987, went away from pipe bands completely after I left the band, and Joe took over, and I stayed away completely. And in 1992, I knew this merger was coming up because I'd been constantly talking with Jake Watson, and Jake had said, just out of courtesy, this is what's going to go down. And that sort of released me from any commitment, because I would have stayed, if I was going to play anywhere, loyalty was the important thing, and the Clan was the band. And so, and it was coincidental with that decision that Bill Livingston phoned me up, and you'll recall the time, because you were there at the time, they needed players in the 78, and he called me up and says, no, come on, get playing type of thing. I said, I'll give it a whirl, because the Clan was no more.
So how did you feel when you saw the Clan MacFarlane basically evaporate? I mean, how did everyone feel? Was it
Terrible. Yeah.
We grew up.
I was the only person that voted no for the merger.
You know,
Gary,
Gary,
just
Peter,
was dead
Peter,
set
and me,
against
we
it.
all grew up in the band. You know, it's so
So-
interesting how a small thing can make such a difference. The day that Ken was no longer pipe major, I think we all know what happened. The meeting, the annual meeting, was usually pretty hilarious. You know, like, well, who's going to stand for pipe major? Who are we going to vote for? And there'd be a big carry on and whatnot. So anyway, this day came along, and George Davis says, I nominate Joe Rennicks for pipe major. Well, do you stand? Joe says, what the hell, I'll stand. Then Ken says, no, I'm not going to stand. So we're, whoa, what the hell, you know.
It was
I remember
the
you
biggest
coming up to
surprise
me
I think that the
afterwards.
whole band
You
had
come
ever
in, you know
had.
anything
That was
about
down
this?
at grade
No, I
2.
don't know anything about it.
and was that
That's the first time that this has ever got.
It probably is. I
No.
remember it so well.
Actually,
And
you
your
were
folks
gonna
were flabbergasted.
Leave.
Joe was
After
brought in
That's
true.
primarily to be my replacement. Scott had left for Ottawa, and there was a time when I'm going to step down, but the best time to step down is when you nurture your successor, and this was part of the overall plan. Somebody that would be creative and what have you. But it hit me like a bombshell, and my first interpretation was spontaneous. I wouldn't see a band divided in any way. I didn't want that to go to a vote and have half the band split. Obviously, there was going to be some people that would vote for one and some for the other, and this is the worst possible situation. This is a family, and I just said, and there was, I didn't have the opportunity of first refusal. It was second refusal, and it caught me totally off guard.
Well, what
Yeah,
Ken
so you-
didn't know was there wouldn't have been a split vote.
No,
And there
So
wouldn't have been a
you
split vote at all. And we all knew, I think to a man, that
Well,
Ken was nurturing Joe to become pipe major. So it was one of those things where I think, George explains it that, he wanted Joe Rennicks to feel good.
But Peter chaired the
exactly
meeting.
what happened, but-
Peter chaired the meeting, and he would go around and ask, how do you stand? Are you going to stand, or what have you? And Joe was first, and he said, I'll stand. And I just didn't. And so it was very spontaneous, and I walked.
So knowing that now, that there wouldn't have been a split vote,
We
you
never,
regret
well,
what
in
you
all
did?
those years, that was 1987, and we're now 16 years later. This is the first I've heard of it.
That's correct. It would not have been a split vote.
No.
I think that everybody here would say the same
Right.
thing.
So isn't that kind of funny, ironic that we're discussing it here in today's forum? So
Now, what,
Huh?
Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil is.
Yeah, he needs
No,
more
at
than
my age,
Dr.
I need
Phil.
Dr. Oz.
I mean, time goes on, so
Yeah.
what would have happened the next year? Who can
It's
say?
all
No.
hearsay at this particular
Who can
stage,
say?
and so,
Somebody has to second it, right? There has to be a second.
oh, that's correct.
So there probably would have been 2 votes.
Yeah. So,
Three.
anyhow,
Well, Joe can't vote.
Late breaking news. Sure you can.
But it was devastating, that day was devastating, we kind of, went away from that
Floored
meeting
us.
saying, what the hell happened, That's exactly what we did,
And did,
to a man.
when Ken said, no, I will not, when Ken said, no, I will not stand, did anyone say, Kenny, you gotta stand?
Well, I
What
think
do you
we're
do?
flabbergasted at that.
no, there was
We
no,
just-
But I think
You have
the
a do-over.
credit of the band is stuck together and Ken stuck for the
Yeah.
next season to continue with Joe for one more season, right?
yeah,
Played
yeah.
88, and I think, for the group, we all, through our support, 100% behind Joe.
Which is the proper thing to do, no question about
Yeah,
it.
we plowed forward as best we could, and I think Joe had a marvelous ear.
What about now, the Ontario scene, and you look at Clan MacFarlane, could Ontario use another Clan MacFarlane these days?
It's a different day and age now, and I don't know whether we could,
I think nowadays when you see people
there anymore?
in a different kilt every summer,
Oh, they move around.
this sense of loyalty and camaraderie,
Yeah.
it's long gone, and now it's, who's the hot ticket?
Peter, I think you're right. I think today the bands could use a little bit of the ethic that we brought to the pipe band scene. And we use the word family all too often, but it's quite true. And it's witness here today. We're still friends. We still see each other socially on numerous occasions during the year. We've had, thanks to Mike and a few others, we had our 50th anniversary reunion in 2007. Went down to Windsor to play, resurrected, saw the old band.
That was one of the
Old-
best times I think we ever
It
had.
might have been. The fact is, there's a sense of loyalty, and it's not, and I think bands today could certainly use a little more of that. Here in this country anyways.
Beyond the ethical portion of all of that, it became, these guys who carry the clipboards hear it every time they're out there, but I hear it from a grade 3 perspective. The fact that unison playing, the quality of unison playing, as far as I'm concerned in Ontario, has been on a steady decline since this kilt switch started, call it in the last 7 or 8 or 10 years. You don't know whose pipe section you're going to be playing in because you don't know who you want to go play with until January, February. Then you'll make 8, 10, 12 practices, and then you'll start to get it together. And then when you hear these bands, they're not producing relative to what was being produced in grade 1, late 80s, late 90s, or early 90s.
There was distinct styles of playing
Great
back in the
yes.
70s and 80s.
Most of that has
grade 1.
disappeared, but
Yeah.
and you talk to some of the bands that consistently go over to Scotland, and you hear the same thing. We're going over there a week early. We're just going to get it all together over there. Well, that's the
That's
largest
what the
waste
winter
of money.
time's for.
That's the largest waste of money you can have. If you don't have it right by Easter, I mean really, really right, then take a listen to the last year's Worlds and the top 5 or 6 bands. They play as one, and they've got 22 or 23 pipers out there. They're playing like one band. You don't hear that over here. And how do they get around it? Well, and I throw right back on the leadership of the grade 1 bands right now and say, listen, put a ticket out there that will develop this, because it's the only way you're going to get ahead. You can go over there all you want. You're going to get on the show Saturday, and you get to drink in the pub on the Sunday.
Okay, so just wrapping it up.
Yeah.
Clan MacFarlane, the history of the band, the legacy of the band. What do you think the band should be remembered for?
I think one thing that we should look at is the music that we did play, and the Highland Wedding set was this #1 set for 15 years, longer than that. I inherited it from Jim Gregg, and I never changed it significantly, did we?
I think we played it right through the
Donald
That's it.
Cameron?
And
Donald
Donald Cameron.
Big reels.
And
Yeah.
big
Donald
reels.
Cameron was the
So
same.
musically, sound-wise, we had a sound that was competitive for the times. Might not compare with the great sounds we're hearing right now, but for the times, it certainly was. And we had one very important win. No doubt we had a lot of wins at Maxwell, but in '72, our first year back, we went to Fergus, and Edinburgh Police had won the Worlds that year, come on a Canadian tour with the St. Thomas Pipe Band, and both the Caberfet and ourselves beat them at Fergus. We won that contest, and so one of the things that sticks out in my mind will be the Fergus of 1972, and that was the hot punch medley that we played first year playing medleys for this band.
And John died that.
John
The
died
next day.
the very
Next
next
day.
day,
Yeah.
John Kirkwood, so there was
Yeah.
quite a lot of nostalgia around that particular weekend, and that was also the first weekend of the C&E in Toronto. So there was 9 days, counting Fergus, around the C&E, and John Kirkwood's passing, and our great performance at.
I
So
think
that
the other
sticks
thing
in
I
my mind.
remember with the band was that it had a very imposing look when it came to the line. You know, it was a big looking band when it came to the line.
Bill Livingston Sr., what was his nickname? The Beasties of the Clan, he says. Yeah.
When it came to the line, they were full of confidence
Presence.
and presence, that's right. And just this imposing look that they had, you know, when they came to the line, and just said, like, we're here to win, boys, you know. Period. And they were. And they did.
Mhm.
You know.
Okay.
Well, inspiring is what it is.
I think
I can
everybody here
remember-
would be glad to say they played with the Clan.
I can remember the first time I took my pipes out of the box out of practice, and the first tune I played with these guys.
All right, we'll leave it there. So,
Okay. Thank
thanks
you.
very much, guys.